Each Friday he visited the same seat, silent, constant, always with a soft grin. But one dawn, he glanced up and voiced something odd. "Next Friday, I won't meet you again." The server assumed he was kidding. He wasn't. A week later, a young soldier arrived, holding a letter that unveiled a poignant truth and a final gesture of compassion so profound it would alter how she viewed the world forever. Press like and comment where you're watching from. Your support brings more touching tales. Now let's start. He arrived every Friday, same hour, same seat, same steady cadence that never wavered. His name was Mr. Bennett, a 75-year-old man who moved with a measured, careful step and wore a faded military coat that seemed older than most patrons in Thedna. He never caused a fuss, never requested much. Just coffee, dark, 2 sugars, and toast, with precisely the right amount of butter. He always chose the same seat by the window, where the late morning rays spread across the table like a trusted old companion. The server who often tended him was Clara. She was 28, attentive and perceptive. Over time, she had learned his habits without a word exchanged. She poured his coffee before he spoke. She brought his toast while it was still hot, and he always left a folded $5 bill beneath the mug. Never more, never less. There was a calm ease in their routine. They didn't need to speak much. Sometimes he would nod, sometimes she would smile, and that was sufficient. Week after week, month after month, it continued like this. He became part of the diner's pulse, as reliable as the buzz of the neon sign outside or the clink of plates in the back. He didn't speak of the past. He didn't mention the medal spinned inside his coat, and he never shared where he went after breakfast. But Clara noticed how he always sat with his back to the wall and how he scanned the room softly before settling in. Then came the Friday when everything felt slightly off. He entered more slowly than usual, as if the world had suddenly grown heavier. He took his seat, gazed out the window longer than normal, and didn't touch his coffee immediately. There was something far off in his eyes, like he was holding a thought too fragile to voice aloud. When he stood to leave, he lingered a moment longer at the seat, gently adjusting his coat sleeve. He looked around the diner, as if trying to etch it in his memory, as if the clatter of spoons and soft chuckle held deeper meaning than anyone else knew. Then, without a word, he placed the folded $5 beneath his mug, nodded toward Clara, and walked out the door. She watched him leave, unsure why the air suddenly felt denser, why her heart pressed against her chest in a way she couldn't explain. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting warm, golden glows across the seat he'd just left. Something about it felt final, but she brushed it off. After all, he came every Friday. Surely next week would be the same. The next Friday arrived with the same sunrise and the same tranquil calm that settled over the small-town diner like a cozy blanket. Clara tied her apron, filled the sugar holders, and flipped the chairs down from the tables as always. By 8:00, the regulars began to trickle in. Farmers, teachers, weary truckers with tails in their eyes. She glanced at the seat by the window. Empty. Perhaps he was delayed. It had happened once or twice. The roads by the hills could be tough, especially after rain. Still, something felt wrong. By 9, her hands had stopped reaching for the dark coffee pot by habit. By 10:00, she had refilled the seat's napkin holder and wiped the clean tablet twice just to avoid staring at the door. He never came. Not that day, not the week after. No calls, no word, nothing. The absence was louder than she expected. The silence where he used to sit seemed to resonate. Customers came and went. Conversations rose and fell. But that seat stayed untouched, as if time had paused right there beneath the sunlight that still poured through their blinds. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. People move. Life happens, veterans especially. They often vanish as quietly as they came. But deep down, she knew it wasn't about a missed meal. It was the way he had paused before leaving. The way he looked around as if releasing something. She replayed his last words over and over in her mind. Not a farewell, just that odd line. "Next Friday I won't meet you again." And the then stranger follow-up. "Everything's where it needs to be." She didn't tell the manager. She didn't mention it to co-workers, but every Friday she kept that seat open. She kept the blinds angled just right to catch the morning light, and she poured 1 extra cup of coffee just in case. She never moved his seat card. She never gave the table away. Then one ordinary afternoon, 2 weeks after that final Friday, a young man entered the diner's front door. He wore an army uniform, moved with quiet confidence, and wore dark glasses that hid his eyes. Clara noticed him instantly. He didn't look around. He walked straight to the counter. His left hand held a white envelope, and he asked softly if her name was Clara. The moment was so still, it felt like the entire diner had paused to listen. The young soldier placed the envelope on the counter with care, as if it were more than just paper. His hand lingered on it for a second longer than needed, as if he were letting go of something heavy. Then, with a gentle voice and a tone that wavered just slightly, he said Mr. Bennet had sent him. No one else in the diner seemed to notice. Conversations hummed on. Silverware clinked. The bell above the kitchen door rang once. But for Clara, the world had narrowed to this young man's presence and the sealed envelope between them. He didn't stay, he didn't sit. He simply added one more sentence before turning away. He said the diner had the warmest glow. And just like that he was gone, leaving behind only silence, a folded envelope, and 1,000 questions. Clara stared at it. Her hand stayed still. Her heart pounded in a way that caught her breath halfway in her chest. She waited until her shift ended. Only then did she take the envelope to the seat by the window. The same seat Mr. Bennet had sat in every week without fail. She slid into the seat, placed the envelope on the table, and sat for a long moment before touching it. The paper was thick, handwritten. Her name was written in bold, careful letters. Nor turn address, just her first name, Clara. She opened it slowly, as if it might disappear the moment she touched the seal. Inside was a single note. The writing was tidy, but carried a weight, each stroke of ink full of age and thought. She read the first line, and her hands began to tremble. He had written that she once asked what he looked forward to each week. He said it was that seat and her smile that reminded him of something he thought he'd lost. He wrote that he had seen enough of the world, that it was time for someone else to see it. Folded within, the note was a small official document, a certificate. She held her breath. He had donated his eyes, and not to just anyone. To a young soldier, everyone who had just entered the diner, the one who could now see the world. Through Mr. Bennet's gift, Clara sat in stunned silence, tears welling in the corners of her eyes. Outside, the afternoon sun shifted through the blinds, casting long shadows across the seat. And for the first time in weeks, the seat didn't feel empty anymore. The sun outside was starting to dip low, brushing the horizon's edge in shades of amber and fading gold. Inside the diner, Clara still sat at the window seat, the envelope resting quietly on the table, her fingertips tracing the edges of the letter again and again, as if grounding herself in its weight. She read the note once more, then again. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but every word carried the gravity of a man who had lived, loved, served, and made peace with all three. He had written that the world had already given him enough, that he'd seen war and wonder, sorrow and sunrise. But the moment he saw her smile every Friday morning, something softened in him, something he thought had gone cold. She'd no idea what she had meant to him. She had no idea that her kindness, quiet, unnoticed by most, had become part of a routine that gave his final years meaning. He called the diner a place of warmth, a corner of the world that reminded him it was still worth believing in. And then, almost as an afterthought, he wrote one final line. He said he hoped that through the eyes of someone younger, that same warmth would live on. Clara gently folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Then she looked up, and through the large diner window she saw the young soldier standing outside. Same uniform, same dark glasses, but this time he wasn't wearing them. He looked nervous, uncertain, like someone learning to see anew. And in a way he was. Clara stood and walked outside, her apron still on, the envelope tucked against her chest like something sacred. The air was cool, the breeze gentle. He introduced himself. His name was Liam. He explained that he had served in a convoy overseas. An IED had taken his sight. He had returned to a world he could no longer see until a match was found. Mr. Bennet had made arrangements months earlier, quietly, without ever speaking of it. Liam said the first thing he truly saw after surgery was a picture of the man who had given him his vision back. Folded beside it was a note that told him to visit Adina to look for the warmth. Now standing in front of her, he smiled, and Clara suddenly understood. Mr. Bennet had not just left a gift. He had left a legacy. The weeks that followed felt different at the diner. Fridays no longer carried the weight of absence, but the glow of presence, of stories shared, and lives touched in ways no one could have imagined. Clara watched as Liam grew comfortable in the small town, finding joy in the simplest things. The way sunlight danced on the worn wooden tables, the smile of a stranger, the scent of fresh coffee brewing for him. Every sight was a new miracle, every face a story waiting to be known. And Clara often thought of Mr. Bennet, his quiet strength, the softness behind his eyes, and the silent sacrifice he made. He had come each week seeking comfort, but left a gift that transcended sight. One evening, as the diner closed and the last patrons filtered out, Clara found Asmal's photograph tucked behind the counter. It was a picture of Mr. Bennet standing tall in his uniform, saluting with pride. Beneath it was a note, his handwriting still firm, still kind. "Thank you for being my warmth," I read. Clara smiled through tears, feeling the full weight of those words. She realized then that some gifts are not given with fanfare or noise. They're quiet acts of courage, offered without expectation, carried forward with love. The diner had always been a place of simple kindness, but now it was a beacon of hope. A reminder that even when one door closes, another opens, filled with possibility. And sometimes the greatest sight comes not from the eyes, but from the heart. Clara looked out the window, where the last light of day melted into the horizon. She thought of Mr. Bennet and Liam, two men connected by courage and sacrifice. She knew that every Friday in that small seat, bathed in warm light, their stories would live on. Because some legacies are meant to be seen forever.